Get the extinguisher!
Clear the kitchen!
You did this.
아빠,
What happened here?
Before we go any further into how they got here, how a spoiled mafia heiress and a chef with nothing to inherit but his own talent ended up staring at each other through smoke. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. To understand how a kitchen fire could hold so much silence, you have to understand the house it happened in. It was not simply a home, it was a monument. Marble floors that never held a footprint for long because someone was always polishing them. A private chef's kitchen, larger than most restaurants, stocked with ingredients flown in overnight from 3 continents. Security men who nodded at the family and looked straight through everyone else. On paper, it belonged to a shipping and logistics empire with offices in 4 countries. In practice, everyone who mattered in Seoul knew what it really was and knew better than to say it out loud. The man who built it all was, first and foremost, a father who had lost his wife too early and never quite learned how to be anything but generous in her absence. Park Ji-ho, feared across Seoul, unquestioned in his own boardrooms, was, inside these walls, simply a man who couldn't say no to his only daughter. Whenever she cried, he solved it. Whenever she was disappointed, he replaced it. Whenever someone treated her badly, that person simply stopped existing in her life, reassigned, paid off, or quietly warned never to return. He believed, with the total sincerity of a man who loved his daughter more than his own safety, that if he simply removed every obstacle from her path, she would grow up happy. What he actually raised was a young woman who had never once been told no, and meant it. She was 23, brilliant in the way people are when they've never had to try very hard, and utterly convinced that everyone eventually had a price. If Park Min-ji didn't like a restaurant, her father bought it. If she didn't like an employee, the employee vanished. Chefs, specifically, had learned to fear her name. 7 of them had come and gone from that kitchen in under 2 years. Some quit within a week. One left crying and never came back for his belongings. One simply stopped answering his phone. It was never really about the food. It was about control, and about a phone call she could make that would end someone's career before they finished plating dinner. So when her father hired an 8th chef, young, calm, and completely unbothered by the family's reputation, she assumed he would last 3 days like the others. His name was Malik Reeves. Malik had trained in some of the most demanding kitchens on the West Coast before crossing an ocean for a job that paid enough to fund the restaurant he'd been dreaming about since he was 17. He hadn't inherited anything. Everything he had, he'd earned one brutal double shift at a time, and he carried that the way some people carry a family name quietly, but never far from the surface. He specialized in a kind of cooking that borrowed from everywhere, and he had a private fascination with Korean technique that he never got to fully explore in the restaurants that employed him. This job wasn't just money, it was access. It was the kind of kitchen he'd need behind him if he ever wanted his own name on a door. He told himself one simple thing walking in: I'm here to cook, not to become part of their world. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. Their first real conversation happened over a dish she'd sent back without tasting. Everything about it was wrong, she said, not looking up from her phone. What specifically didn't you like? He asked. She blinked. No one asked her that. People apologized, people replated, people groveled a little, just enough to remind her who had the power in the room. Everything, she repeated, sharper this time. That's not very useful feedback, he said, and went back to the stove. She stared at the side of his face for a long moment, trying to decide if she was more offended or more curious. It would take her weeks to admit it was the second one. She tried the line that had ended careers before. Do you know who my father is? He didn't even pause his knife. Yes. She waited for the fear to arrive on his face. It never did. That's why I was hired to cook here, he said. Not to worship you. She left the kitchen that night angrier than she'd been in years, and she couldn't explain to herself why she kept thinking about it. The household staff noticed something was different almost immediately. The old chefs used to flinch when she walked into a room. This one kept humming while he worked, completely unbothered, as if her presence carried no more weight than the hum of the refrigerator. It drove her, in her own words, quietly insane. She started finding excuses to walk past the kitchen more often than she needed to, telling herself it was to check on him, never quite admitting it was to watch him work. What followed was, by her own private admission, a campaign. She criticized his food, and he refined it until the criticism had nowhere left to land. She changed her order after he'd already started cooking, hoping to catch him unprepared, and he adjusted without missing a step. She humiliated him once in front of the household staff, expecting him to snap the way the others had instead. He simply set down his knife, looked at her, and said nothing at all, which somehow embarrassed her more than any argument could have. She threatened to have him fired. "Then I suppose your father will have to decide," he said, and walked away before she could finish being furious about it. She tried one more tactic, the pettiest of all, she asked him, with total seriousness, to prepare a dish combining 7 different regional cuisines in a single plate, certain it would either humiliate him or drive him out on principle. He served it to her 20 minutes later. A small, elegant plate that somehow made sense, 7 traditions balanced instead of fighting each other. She stared at it for a long moment. "This is actually good," she admitted, almost offended by her own sentence. "I know," he said without a trace of arrogance, already turning back to the stove. "You can go now." She left the kitchen and, for reasons she refused to examine that night, found herself smiling in the hallway where no one could see her do it. Nothing worked. And the less it worked, the more she found herself watching him, the precision of his hands, the calm in his voice even when she was doing everything she could to break it, the way he never once looked at her like she was something to be managed. It was during this stretch of quiet warfare that he mentioned something to her almost by accident while plating a dish she hadn't asked about. "There's a word in Korean," he said. "Sun mat, it means hand taste. The idea that food carries something of the person who made it, not the recipe, the person. Same ingredients, same pan, different hands, different taste." She scoffed. "That's not real. Salt is salt." "Prove it," he said, and set 2 identical-looking bowls of the same soup in front of her. "One of these I made. The other, one of the staff made from my exact recipe. Same measurements, same heat. Tell me which is mine." She rolled her eyes but tasted both. She got it wrong, confidently, and he didn't gloat, he just watched her face change when he told her. "That's impossible," she said. "That's sun mat," he said. "You can't fake care, even when you try to copy it exactly." She hated that she thought about that sentence for the rest of the night. It was 3 days after the hand taste bowls at the fire happened. Her frustration had been building for weeks with no outlet, and one evening, in a moment she would later struggle to fully explain even to herself, she created a small, careless danger in the kitchen, not meaning to seriously hurt him, only meaning to frighten him, to finally make him the 8th chef who quit and never came back. The flare-up that followed was far more violent than she expected. He was thrown backward, staff came running, and in the half-second before the horror settled onto her face, he saw something else there first, something closer to satisfaction than fear. Then it was gone, replaced by panic that looked almost real. He had no proof, only a burn on his shoulder and a suspicion he couldn't shake. Her father did not accept the vague explanation the household staff gave him. Park Ji-ho was a man who had built an empire on knowing exactly what was true and exactly what people wanted him to believe, and he had not survived this long by confusing the two. He pulled security footage frame by frame. He interviewed staff one at a time, in private, in the low, patient voice he usually reserved for business rivals, who thought they'd gotten away with something. He cross-referenced kitchen inventory records against the timeline of the fire. What he found was not a single accident, but a pattern, small sabotages, quiet cruelties, escalating over weeks, each one dismissed by the household as unrelated bad luck, because no one wanted to be the person who told him the truth about his own daughter. He sat alone in his study that night, with the footage paused on a single frame, his daughter's face, half lit by the kitchen's emergency lighting, wearing an expression he didn't recognize on her. Not the daughter he raised, someone else. Someone he had, without meaning to, helped create. He thought about her mother, about the promises he'd made at a hospital bed years ago to keep their daughter safe and happy no matter what it cost him. And he understood, with a clarity that felt like grief, that he had kept exactly half of that promise and broken the other half so slowly he'd never noticed doing it. Someone could have died in his kitchen, under his roof, because of choices his daughter had made. That was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact he could not unlearn. That was the night his patience ended. He didn't disown her. He didn't raise his voice. What he did was worse, in her eyes, than any explosion of anger could have been. Park Ji-ho sat his daughter down and calmly, methodically, took away every privilege that money had ever bought her. The unlimited allowance, the credit cards, the ability to pay for other people's loyalty. He kept paying for her tuition, her housing, her medical care, the things a parent owes a child, but the discretionary wealth, the currency she had used her entire life to keep people close, disappeared overnight. "I am not taking care of you less," he told her. "I am taking away the part of my wealth you've been using to avoid becoming an adult." Then, quieter, "You thought money made people respect you. Now find out who respects you without it." At first, she genuinely believed it wouldn't change anything. She had known some of these people since her first year of university, sat with them through breakups, funded their spring trips without being asked, covered bills for people who called themselves her closest friends. Surely, she told herself, loyalty like that didn't evaporate over something as small as a paused credit card. She didn't believe it would matter. Her friends had known her for years. Within 10 days, the invitations stopped coming. The group chat went quiet around her, plans forming and finalizing without her name ever appearing in them. When she finally asked Ha-eun, one of her closest friends, what was going on, the girl hesitated so long the silence answered the question before her mouth did. "Things are just different now," she finally said. "Different how? You don't really have access to things anymore." That single sentence did more damage than the fire had, because it told her in plain language what she had always secretly feared and never let herself examine. None of them had ever loved her. They had loved what came attached to her. She saw them one last time at an event she used to be able to walk into without a second glance. This time, a member of the group looked right through her and said, flatly, "We're already full." She knew it was a lie. She walked out into the night alone, and for the first time in her life, there was no door that money could open for her. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comments section, because this is exactly where her story stopped being about privilege and started being about who she really was underneath it. The chef did not rush in to comfort her. He remembered too clearly what Park Min-ji had done to him, and he wasn't willing to pretend that a burn heals just because someone finally looks sorry. He kept his distance, kept his boundaries, kept doing his job with the same quiet discipline he always had. But he wasn't cruel about it either. One evening, passing her door and noticing she hadn't come down to eat in almost a full day, he left a plate outside it without a word, no note, no lecture, nothing that demanded a reaction from her. She opened the door holding the plate like it might disappear if she looked away from it too long. "Why?" she asked when she found him in the kitchen later. "Because you were hungry," he said. "You still hate me." "Those two things aren't the same," he said, "and I don't remember saying I hated you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to trust. But it was the first crack in a wall that had been standing between them since the day they met. And something about the quiet way he said it made her feel, for the first time in weeks, that she was still a person and not just a cautionary tale being whispered about in her own house. One afternoon, she wandered into the kitchen while he was preparing something for himself, not for the household, just a quiet meal on his break, a dish his grandmother used to make back home, deeply seasoned, nothing like the delicate plates she was used to being served. "What is that?" she asked, wrinkling her nose at the smell in a way that clearly wasn't as subtle as she thought. "Dinner," he said. "You're welcome to try it, but I make no promises about your reaction." She took a bite, expecting to hate it out of sheer stubbornness, and instead went quiet in a way that surprised them both. "Why does no one serve me food like this?" "Because you spent 3 years terrorizing anyone who tried to bring you something outside your comfort zone," he said, not unkindly. "This isn't fine dining. This is somebody's grandmother's kitchen. Completely different rules." "What rules?" "You eat what's put in front of you, and you say thank you," he said. "And if you don't like it, you still say thank you." She laughed despite herself. "That sounds like torture." "That's hospitality," he said. "You should try it sometime." She didn't have a comeback for that one, and for once, she didn't try to invent one. A few nights later, he found her sitting alone at the small staff table near the pantry, a table she had never once acknowledged existed before losing everything that used to keep her upstairs. "I want to try something," he said, and set 2 bowls in front of her the way he had that first time. "Same test. One is mine, one isn't. Why does it matter now?" "Because the first time, you didn't actually want to know the answer. You just wanted to prove me wrong. He nodded at the bowls. Try again. She tasted both slowly this time, without the performance of contempt she used to wear like armor. She got it right. She looked up at him, almost stunned by her own accuracy, and for the first time since he'd started working in that house, he smiled at her, not a polite, professional smile, but a real one. See, he said, hand taste isn't magic, it's attention. You just finally started paying it. And she laughed, actually laughed, surprised at the sound of it in her own throat, and something between them shifted permanently in that moment, quiet and small and entirely real. Weeks passed differently after that. She started appearing in the kitchen not to criticize, but to watch. She asked questions instead of issuing demands. She learned, slowly and badly at first, how to hold a knife properly, how to taste for balance instead of flaw, how to sit in a room with someone and simply talk without performing for them. She told him things about her mother she had never said out loud to anyone, how she barely remembered her voice. Only the shape of the empty space her death left in the house. A space her father tried to fill with things because he didn't know how to fill it with anything else. He told her about the restaurants that turned him away for reasons that had nothing to do with his talent, about the nights he cooked family meals for people who would never once ask his name. Slowly, carefully, two people who had started as enemies became something neither of them had a clean word for yet. But nothing that easy lasts without being tested. The midpoint of everything came the night he finally learned the full truth about the fire. He'd never fully let go of what he saw in her expression that night, and eventually, in a quiet moment that felt safer than it should have, he asked her directly, "Did you do it?" She had a full second, a long, unbearable second where she could have told him everything. Instead, old instinct took over, the instinct of a person who had spent her whole life making problems disappear instead of facing them. "No," she said. It was a lie, and it would cost her more than the truth ever could have. Her father discovered the whole story not long after, not just the fire, but something else buried underneath it that complicated the picture in a way no one expected. In the middle of her worst months, while her own world was collapsing, Park Minji had been quietly using what little discretionary money she had left to help her friend Minji through a private crisis, asking for nothing in return, telling no one. It didn't undo what she'd done to the chef. But it meant the daughter who had burned a man out of jealousy and the daughter who had quietly saved a friend without wanting credit were the same person, someone capable of real harm and real kindness, still learning which one she wanted to be. The betrayal that finally broke things fully into the open came from Grace Han, a friend she used to trust. Furious at being cut off, and even more furious at hearing rumors that the heiress had grown close to the help, Grace found Malik alone one afternoon near the mansion's gate and told him everything about the fire, not gently, not to warn him, but in the ugliest possible version, dressed up as concern while every word was aimed like a blade. "I just think you deserve to know who you're actually falling for," she said, smiling the entire time, and walked away before he could ask a single question, satisfied that she'd done exactly the damage she came to do. He didn't confront the daughter that night. He needed a day to sit with it first, to separate what he'd already suspected from what he was only now hearing confirmed out loud. When he finally did ask her, his voice was quieter than she expected, which somehow made it worse. "Did you do it?" he asked. Again. The same three words from months ago, except this time they both already knew the shape of the answer waiting underneath them. And this time there was no room left to lie. She told him the truth. All of it, the frustration, the plan to scare him, the way it had spiraled into something she never intended and never forgave herself for. She told him about the flash of relief she'd felt and hated herself for, and the shame that followed it every day since. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You had weeks to tell me the truth," he finally said. "You chose to lie every single time." "I know. That's the part I can't get past yet, not the fire, the lying." He needed distance after that, not cruelty, just space to figure out whether what he felt for her was real or simply the result of watching someone change in front of him. "Am I falling for who she is?" he asked himself one night, alone in the kitchen that had started all of this, "or who I hope she becomes?" He didn't have an answer yet, and he refused to pretend he did just to make either of them feel better. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video. Your support helps us continue bringing you more powerful stories like this one. And this is where her real transformation began, not because he asked her to change, but because she finally understood that his forgiveness could no longer be the reason she did. She started rebuilding herself in the quiet, unglamorous places nobody was watching. Park Min-ji apologized to household staff she had spent years treating as furniture, and meant it. She learned to cook not to impress anyone, but because for the first time she wanted to understand what it actually took to make something with her own hands instead of her father's money. She solved her own problems instead of reaching for a phone call that would make them vanish. She rebuilt one or two friendships from nothing, slowly, on terms of total honesty instead of convenience. She started sitting with the household staff during their breaks instead of summoning them, learning their names properly for what felt, embarrassingly, like the first time Mrs. An, the housekeeper who had 2 children in university, and Jun-ho, the driver who had once wanted to be an architect before life pointed him somewhere else. She began asking questions instead of giving orders, and slowly, the fear that used to precede her into every room started to soften into something closer to respect, earned instead of enforced. One evening, she overcooked a simple dish so badly it filled the kitchen with smoke. And instead of blaming the stove or the ingredients the way she once might have, she simply laughed at herself, scraped the pan clean, and started again. The chef, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but he noticed. He always noticed. None of it was for him. That was the part that finally made it real. Her father noticed the change before the chef fully let himself believe it. One evening, Park Ji-ho sat across from his daughter the way he hadn't in years, and admitted something he'd never said out loud. "I taught you that I could protect you from everything," he said. "I never taught you that sometimes the consequence is the lesson." He reached for her hand. "I didn't punish you because I stopped loving you. I punished you because I finally understood that protecting you from everything was the thing hurting you most." She cried, not from sadness, but from the strange relief of finally being seen by the one person who had spent her whole life trying to shield her from being seen at all. "I used to think people were replaceable," she told him quietly, wiping her face. "Chefs, friends, anyone who disappointed me. Just find another one." "I remember," he said. "You said it about the third chef standing right there by the stove." "I don't believe it anymore," she said. "I don't know when that changed. I just know it did." He reached across the table and, for the first time in years, simply held his daughter's hand without trying to fix anything, without offering to buy anything, without a single solution attached to the gesture, just a father sitting with the consequences alongside her, the way he should have been doing all along. The final test came without warning, the way real tests usually do. Malik was offered a position abroad, the kind of opportunity that could finally give him the restaurant he'd been dreaming about since he was 17. He started preparing to leave, quietly, without asking her to weigh in, because some part of him still wasn't sure he had the right to. The old version of her would have used every tool available to keep him there, her father's influence, her own tears, whatever it took to make sure she never lost anything again. Instead, Park Min-ji found him the night before he was supposed to leave and told him the one thing she never thought she'd be capable of saying. "You should go." He looked at her, stunned. "Why?" "Because I spent years thinking love meant making people stay," she said. "I don't want to become that person again. Not even for you." He left the next morning before the sun was fully up, the way he'd once told her all good kitchens start their day quietly, before anyone's watching. She stood at her window and watched the car pull away from the mansion gates, and she made herself stay standing there until it was completely out of sight instead of turning away the moment it hurt, because some old, stubborn part of her still believed that if she looked away first, it wouldn't really be happening. The house felt unbearably quiet without the sound of him in the kitchen before sunrise. She passed the staff table where he'd once made her taste 2 bowls of soup and prove she'd been paying attention, and for a week she couldn't bring herself to sit there. She didn't call him. She didn't ask her father to intervene, though she knew one phone call from him could probably have delayed the entire opportunity if she'd asked. She simply lived with the outcome of her own honesty, and for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Not painless, not easy, but enough, the way a person can survive a wound without needing someone else to make it disappear. Her father watched her get through those weeks without once reaching for the tools he used to hand her automatically. And Park Ji-ho said nothing about it, because he understood, finally, that this silence was the proof his lesson had actually worked. He came back 3 weeks later, on his own, without being asked. She found him standing in the kitchen exactly where she'd first tried to insult him out of the house months earlier, 2 bowls already set out on the counter between them. "You came back," she said. You finally learned how to let someone leave, he said. That's rarer than you think, he nodded toward the bowls. One's mine. Prove you still remember what attention tastes like. She tasted them both slowly, the way he'd taught her. And when she pointed to the correct one without hesitation, he didn't smile this time. He crossed the space between them instead. I came back because I chose to, he said. Not because you made me. There's a difference, and you're the reason I finally know what it is. I know, she said, laughing through the beginning of tears. I don't worship you either. Good, he said. I never wanted you to. Her father stood at the edge of the small kitchen doorway that day, unnoticed by either of them, watching Park Minji laugh at herself over a burnt dish in a way he hadn't seen since before her mother died. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply turned and walked away, letting them have the moment without his shadow in it. And for a man who had spent his whole life needing to control every room he entered, that quiet act of stepping back was its own kind of love, the kind he'd finally learned how to give. The story doesn't end in the mansion that once represented everything wrong about how she loved. It ends much later, in a small, warm kitchen that belongs to no one's empire, just the two of them. In a dish she made herself, nervous in a way her old self would never have allowed anyone to see. Judge it, she said, sliding the plate toward him. He took a bite. Let the silence stretch a second longer than she could comfortably stand. Needs work, he said finally. She rolled her eyes, laughing despite herself. He took a second bite anyway. But I'd eat it again. She had spent her entire childhood believing that money could make people stay. Then she lost the money, and the people who only ever wanted what came with her disappeared right along with it. But somewhere between the empty invitations, the silent mansion, and a kitchen where she finally learned to listen instead of demand, she discovered something her father's fortune had never been able to teach her, that love isn't measured by what someone is willing to take from you. It's measured by what remains when there's nothing left to give. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one who saves you from your consequences. It's the one who makes you brave enough to become someone worthy of a second chance. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves meaningful stories. We'll see you in our next unforgettable journey.